NRATV with Bill Whittle.
Hi everybody, welcome to NRATV, and this show is Hot Mike. Hot Mike got his headshots back, and he didn't like them very much. He's in the back crying, which is not normally a problem, but the mascara is running down his face, so we expect to get him back up and running by tomorrow. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that you may have seen parenthetically, and one of the things that I'm trying to do with this show is to kind of link together a bunch of different things to kind of show you how the left works and the kind of psychology they have, some of the things that they do really well, and some of their weaknesses. And of all their weaknesses, their primary weakness, and it's a pretty big one, is that the way that modern progressivism is structured, it has to destroy itself. It destroys a lot of other things around it that are valuable and good and pure, but it ends up destroying itself, and it has to. It has to because of the way the psychology of the left is structured and by the political strategies they use. So when I say that the left eats itself, which will be the theme for the show today, I'm not talking about things like self-criticism. For example, here's a little clip of the response to the Democrats losing the race in Georgia. So let's roll that real quick.
Well, that's not going to be for me to decide, but we have to, as a caucus, have this conversation. And look, I'm not going to pretend that this is an easy conversation to have. Not easy speaking truth to power. Nancy Pelosi was a great speaker. She is a great leader, but her time has come and gone. Yes, she's a great fundraiser, but if the money that we are raising with her through her leadership is not helping us win elections, then we have to have this difficult conversation now.
Congressman Sam Stein here. Do you think that's fundamentally unfair to Nancy Pelosi? I mean, basically what you're adopting is the framework of the conservatives who criticize her, that she's an out-of-touch San Francisco liberal. Do you believe that criticism, yes or no? And if not, why are you adopting it as a rationale for getting new leadership?
The rationale for getting new leadership is we are losing, and we have been losing since 2010.
Yes, but you...
Okay, so that's not the kind of thing I'm talking about. I brought it up as an example, a recent example, of the kind of thing I'm specifically not talking about. What that is a form of criticizing your own party, which they don't do often enough, and they usually get wrong, but nevertheless, that is the kind of criticism that's appropriate, and the Republicans do it and have done it and should do it, so that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the left eating itself, and to understand why this happens and how it has to happen, we have to understand a little bit about where modern progressivism came from. So let me just give you a real quick 2-minute history course. After World War I was over, the Marxists of the world looked around and said, where's our socialist utopia? Marx was declared as science. It wasn't just theory, it was science. Marxism declared that we were supposed to have socialism come to the advanced countries, industrial countries like Britain and Germany and France and the United States, but it didn't. Communism came to Russia and it was backwards. And these people formed a think tank, that's what we call it today. And they called it the Institute for Marxism, but we call it the Frankfurt School because it was based in Frankfurt. So here's the point. After a while, these Marxists realized that the revolution, the world revolution, wasn't going to come because the workers were doing pretty well. Those sons of guns over in the United States were paying workers so well they had their own houses and their own cars. Why would they possibly launch a revolution that way? Now, you would think that rising living standards would make these Marxists happy, but that's not how they work. They need the political power, and they need to tell people what to do. So in order to bring around their Marxist revolution, they decided that the new way to do this will be not with the workers, but with the dispossessed. That they would find all of the fringe groups in America. And their strategy was called critical theory, and the strategy is pretty simple. Instead of America working the way it's supposed to work, which is e pluribus unum, out of many one, somebody raises their hand, they become a U.S. citizen, they're as American as somebody whose family got off the Mayflower. Everybody gives up their old identities, they come to America as new people. That's what got us the strength that we have. But the left's current strategy is the precise opposite of that. Instead of it coming together, they've decided to divide America up into tribes, into little tribes. There's the gay community, there's the black community, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, lesbian Americans. It goes on and on and on and on and on. And the idea is not to have these tribes attack each other. The idea is to have these tribes attack the middle, the center of the country. That's how they'd bring about their workers' paradise here in the living hell of America. Now, here's the problem for them. if they're going to have identity politics, and if victimization is the highest form of virtue for the left, and it is, it's kind of like, this movie about the immortals, right? There can only be one. There's only one last person somewhere in America. There's a top victim. There's somebody who is the most oppressed person by their own rules. Here's where it gets interesting. The left will eat itself and destroy itself because it has to find victims. A great example of this was at the Oscars of a couple years ago, where all 20 of the major nominees, none of them were black. Let's look at what progressives had to say about, not about conservatives, about the most liberal, the most progressive people in the country, which is Hollywood. What were they doing and saying to themselves about themselves? Let's take a look.
Well, it's really interesting. I've been nominated twice for Academy Awards. And I've never lost to a white person. The first time I lost to Denzel, the second time I lost to Forrest Whitaker. So for me, that was huge. So when I see this list and series of nominations that come out, and everybody is fantastic, and that's the complexity of this issue. Everyone is beautiful and deserving, and it's fantastic, but it feels like it's going the wrong direction.
The Academy has the right to acknowledge whomever they choose, to invite whomever they choose. And now I think that it's our responsibility now to make the change. Maybe it is time that we pull back our resources and we put them back into our communities, into our programs, and we make programs for ourselves that acknowledge us in ways that we see fit, that are just as good as the so-called mainstream ones. I don't know. Here's what I do know. Begging for acknowledgement, or even asking, diminishes dignity and diminishes power. And we are a dignified people, and we are powerful, and let's not forget it.
So let's recap, shall we? Jada Pinkett Smith is essentially saying to white Hollywood, again, the biggest, most liberal, most progressive people in the country, since you went a whole year without any black nominees, you're a whole bunch of racists. Therefore, we have to take our resources, meaning the black community, and spend it basically on ourselves, since we can't trust you white people to have us adequately represented. And by adequately represented, I guess that means that there must be at least one black actor or director in every category, which effectively means, Jada, which effectively means, if that's what you're calling for, regardless of talent, regardless of merit, then what you're really calling for is a best black actor category. And you want to talk about demeaning, and you want to talk about restricting and powerlessness, that's about as far as you get. So let's take a look at this from the outside, and in order to do that, let's bring in another friend of NRATV. It's Tim Graham from the Ever Reliable Media Research Center. Tim, how are you? Good to see you.
Good.
All right. Tim, this kind of thing is, it's sometimes fun to watch. It's often destructive to watch, but it's not uncommon, is it, to see left-wingers arguing for who's got the greatest victimhood status and who most deserves the sainthood of being the most oppressed.
I think awards shows are one of those things where they all get their affirmation. So it becomes to them something where they have, on some level, a right to be affirmed. And I think we all understand that when it comes to acting, it might be a little bit like figure skating. It's not, somebody's not faster than somebody else. Somebody's not necessarily more artistic than somebody else. When it comes down to it, I think we all understand the Oscars is a popularity contest. And what the Academy has been trying to do now is trying to load more minority voters into the popularity contest so that they don't get in this situation. So I mean, it is, they've tried to fix it.
I just meant to say, and they're having some success. Do you think that this last Oscar ceremony there was a remarkable film called La La Land, a big, enormous musical number, beautifully made, very intricate film, and it lost Best Picture to a film from Miami that was about a black teen and looked actually like it was shot on an iPhone. Do you think that that was the Academy basically offering up a sacrifice to this god of political correctness and laying out a mea culpa to show what swell people they are?
There's one is more politically correct than the other. There's no doubt about that. La La Land was a movie that was not a politically conservative film, but as a film, it was a throwback. It was a reminder of the golden era of musicals. There haven't been a lot of movie musicals that aren't some sort of adaptation of a Broadway show. And it was wildly popular. You know, usually what we find is the film that wins the Oscar has the lowest box office. I mean, and I think that's what happened here again, is a film that didn't have much of an audience beat a film that was wildly popular.
Quick final question for you here. The Academy Awards Oscar host that year was Chris Rock. And Chris Rock was bemoaning all of this and talking about the lack of diversity and so on. But Chris Rock is a guy who's come out very outspoken about the fact that he won't play colleges anymore because they're too politically correct. He says he's just simply not going to do it. And so it's a little hypocritical, isn't it, that the progressives who created this culture of, you know, who can be the biggest victim are now, and Bill Maher's doing the same thing, they're now rebelling and recoiling against these politically correct monsters that they've really done so much to create.
Yeah, the comedians are especially sort of in the crosshairs here because they really want the ability to make fun of everyone. And especially when your comedy relies on a certain amount of shock value, you don't want that shock value to have you drive into a ditch, like Bill Maher using the N-word on Real Time. He thought that he was going to be edgy, and he ended up driving into a ditch. So, you know, the comedians are going to be the first people to actually complain. Maybe they'll create their own victimized class.
I have no doubt that's on the way. And it's not just a ditch, Tim, it's widening into an absolute canyon. And you guys get to point it out to us pretty much all the time over at the Media Research Center. Thank you so much, Tim Graham, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thanks.
Okay, when we come back after the break, we're going to talk more about this idea of the left eating itself, because while the visible part is up high where the Oscars are and stuff, down below the surface, like an iceberg, is where the real threat is. So when we come back, we're going to talk about what's happening on American college campuses and the degree of vitriol and temper tantrums and violence and all the rest as this country, with its left-wing professors, continues to raise an entire generation of violent, spoiled, emotional children. And many of these children are in their 30s. We'll be right back after the break. I'm Bill Whittle. This is Hot Mike on NRATV.